Hello, welcome to your first anatomy lecture of the year. All right. So, like I said, I'm going to post lectures online. When you are not in class, you should be watching these. And actually, when you're in class, we'll probably watch these as well. You have an opportunity to watch them at any time. Go back and review them, pause them, study them. And obviously, you can follow along on the PowerPoint that I have here on my screen. You can follow along with your note packet. You can follow along with the learning targets. So this lecture is going to be a little bit lengthy because I'm going to go over a lot of kind of basic information about what exactly anatomy and physiology are and some basics of the human body. All right. And again, the goal is that we do these video lectures a little bit more outside of class. So then while you're in class, we're doing more labs and hands-on activities. I apologize for me looking down and looking up, and I don't like myself on camera, but I guess that's the best we got. So follow along and let's see what we can do. So intro to anatomy and physiology. So first and foremost, what the heck do anatomy and physiology mean? Two different words that work together very well. So first of all, anatomy is the examination of the structure or morphology of body parts and their relationships. What's that mean? Basically, how is a structure built? All right. So when I can look at a bone, or I can look at a muscle, or I can look at different organs in my body, I'm looking at how it is built, how it is shaped, and the structure and the relationship between that structure and other structures around it. So that basically goes into this number one, form and organization of body parts. Now there's three different types of anatomy, and I'll tell you what one we're going to do here in just a minute. So the first one's called developmental anatomy. All right. So again, anatomy, the form of something. So when I say developmental anatomy, I'm saying, well, the study of how something developed. So obviously we develop in our lifetimes, we grew. So we're going to look at how our structures change. How did your bones get longer? How did your muscles get bigger? How did your brain grow? Okay. Pathological anatomy, we're studying diseased body structures. We don't do that a lot in this class. We will do some developmental anatomy in this class, not a lot of pathological anatomy. Diseased body structure. So I'm looking at how a disease might affect the form or the structure of that body part. And again, that's going to relate to physiology here in a moment. Systemic anatomy, that's this class. Systemic anatomy is a system by system approach to anatomy. So we go one system, then the next, then the next, then the next. What that means is, well, for this class, we start off with two pretty kind of general units. This is an intro to anatomy, learning about terms and directional things. Next unit, we're talking about tissues, and then we get into the systems. We'll kind of go outside in for the most part. So we'll start with the skin, which is the integumentary system, and then we'll kind of work our way inside the body to get to those organ systems that you might have heard about before. So that's systemic anatomy. That's what we're doing in this class. Now, how does that relate to, how does that relate to physiology? Physiology is the function. Think of that F sound at the start of the word. Physiology is function of body parts. What do they do and how do they function? Very important to remember that structure affects the function. The anatomy affects the physiology. So how is something built? And then how does that build affect its job? Easy example. If I put my hand in the camera here, right? My hand can grab. I can bend it this way. But if I put a ball on the back of my hand, I can't grab it up there. I probably got to use my other hand, right? My fingers aren't going to bend that way unless you're double jointed or something. But I can grab something that's placed in my hand here. And you see how these joints allow you to do this stuff, but I can't take fingers and bend them out or in or do all kinds of weird things. So the structure, how those bones are built, how they're put together affects their function. Forms a well-organized human organism. And each part plays a role in the unit as a whole. So what's that mean? You might have broken your arm, might have broken your leg. You might have seen people that have lost limbs, possibly lost eyesight. Everything helps to play a role in how the organism functions. If you broke your arm, you notice that you lost a little bit of the function. You lost the ability to do some things, not permanently, and you probably learn to live without it. But the anatomy of a structure, the physiology of a structure, goes into how the entire organism functions. Muscles of a hand, bones and muscles of a hand, that's an example I just gave you. Here's a great example of how the anatomy affects the physiology. Joints, all right? Everybody look at your arm and bend your arm at the elbow like you're doing a curl, right? You have a joint in your elbow, and it allows you to just go straight up and down, right? This joint's not going sideways. It's not going in a big circle. Whereas your shoulder, I can go in big circles. I can kind of go up and I can go down. I can go forwards. I can go backwards. Well, the reason that's able to happen is because the anatomy of those joints are completely different, and it allows the physiology to be completely different as well. Here's a good picture of that. I have a bunch of different joints around the body, and we'll talk about these. And by the way, a joint is called an articulation. So if you hear that term, articulation, that's what we're discussing. So look at this top one up here. I think this will work. Yeah, there you go. Look at this top one up here. I have a pivot joint. Pivot joint, there's this thing, these vertebrae in our neck called the atlas and the axis. That basically allows us to turn our head side to side. Okay, that's very different than the ball and socket joint right here, where our hip is able to go in these big circles and you can take your legs a bunch of different directions. So the structure or the anatomy affect the function or the physiology. That leads us into this somatotype. I'm going to do a little activity in class with this, but the somatotype is basically a category or how a person is built or their physique. You probably might have heard that term physique before. There's three different types. Well, three different types of somatotype. Let's talk about the first one. Number one is called an endomorph. An endomorph is a heavier person. They might carry a lot of fat in their trunk or their thighs. Now, when you hear these terms, it's not necessarily saying that one is bad and one is good. It's not saying one is super overweight and one is super skinny and one is super muscular. It's just body build and body type. So, for example, an endomorph could be really, really, really healthy, but they're a little bit heavier in certain areas. So keep that in mind when you're studying this. All right, so endomorph, little bit more fat in the trunk or the thighs. There's two types of endomorphs. I'll show you pictures here in a minute. Apple-shaped endomorphs and pear-shaped endomorphs. Apple-shaped endomorphs are going to carry the weight a little bit higher in their abdomen. Pear-shaped will carry it a little bit lower in their hips and thighs. Second type of somatotype is a mesomorph. A mesomorph. This is a muscular physique. Think of it this way: muscles, meso, Mr. Moore. Okay, Mr. Moore's very muscular. Not really. Okay, but anyway, a mesomorph is a very muscular physique. Then third one, we have an ectomorph. I always think of ecto. For some reason, I see it here, the ECT, the ecto, and I think of skeleton or something that's really skinny. Okay, so an ectomorph is a thin, fragile physique with very little body fat. Now, why are these things important? Well, it's kind of a red flag. A doctor can look at the somatotype of a person and then kind of be able to understand what they're looking for. Okay, so they can make healthcare decisions. That's not the only thing that they will use to make healthcare decisions, but they'll be able to know, okay, these are the things I'm looking for because this person may be a little bit overweight or underweight. So somatotype is important for doctors and nurses when they're assessing a patient. It's just one of those first things. Again, more would be done. So example down here, endomorphs sometimes have a higher risk of heart disease, stroke, blood pressure, high blood pressure, diabetes. That would be something that a doctor sees an endomorph come into their office. They'd be looking for those things. All right, so here's some pictures. And I'm not going to read through all these, but I have an ectomorph, or very skinny on the left, mesomorph, very muscular, then endomorph, carrying a little more weight, possibly in the abdomen or the thighs. Now, apple versus pear. All right, so you can see this here, an apple shape. This is why they call it apple shaped or pear shaped. Apple shaped are going to carry more weight above that waistline. You can see how the top or thicker part of the apple is above the waistline, whereas the pear shape carries a little bit more weight below the waistline. That's where we get the apple versus pear endomorph. So endomorph, ectomorph, and mesomorph. Next, we have this. How is a body arranged? This is a review for you. You've done this in biology. I actually think you might have done it in probably just biology. All right. So let's go from the smallest to the biggest. And I bet you guys could probably do this without me telling you. But I start at the very bottom, basic level. We're all made of atoms. Now, atoms are not living, but atoms make up living things. Okay. In addition to that, atoms make up non-living things. But remember that atoms make up us. An atom makes up a cell. We are all made of cells. A cell is the smallest unit of function in a living thing. So obviously, we're a living thing. We're made of cells. Those cells are made of a bunch of organelles, and again, you did that in biology. Cells make up tissue. These are groups of specialized cells with a specialized function. In our body, we have 4 different tissue types, and there they are. Muscle, so that's probably an easy one to know. Nervous tissue, that'd be our brain and spinal cord. Connective tissue, that'd be ligaments, tendons, cartilage, bones. Blood is actually a connective tissue. And then epithelial tissue, that's kind of the harder one for people to understand, but epithelial tissue would be like the outer layer of your skin. That's epithelial tissue. All right. Now it says letter A, cells of tissues all develop together from the same part of the embryo. That's something that we might take a look at in class, basically how an organism develops as it's going through this development. So we started with atoms, cells, tissues. Next is organs. I bet you can name a bunch of organs in the body, okay, but it's basically a bunch of tissues that are grouped together and have a really special function. All right, so the important thing to remember here is that an organ is made of all tissue types. So I can look at my heart. A heart has muscle tissue, has nervous tissue, has connective tissue, has epithelial tissue. Same with my liver. Same with my gallbladder. Same with your skin. Your skin is the largest organ in the body. Okay. From there, we have an organ system. Organ system is a group of organs that function closely together. Think of the organ systems in the body. You probably have heard of some. Digestive system, respiratory system, circulatory system, reproductive system. Okay, there are 11 organ systems in the body. We're going to learn them all. And then lastly, all that stuff together makes up the organism. So that's the levels of organization. Oops, I got to move this little thing out of the way. Basically, all this stuff comes together to form a functioning living thing. So here you go, just some pictures. I got atoms up here on the left, cells, tissues up here on the right, organ system, and then organism.